This week's edition comes from Indonesia, where recent attacks on churches and other minorities have raised fears that hardline Islamic groups are gaining support there.
In every corner of this country, mosques dot the skyline. There are more Muslims here than anywhere else on earth. But this is a country that isn't governed by its faith. Here in Indonesia, the law guarantees the rights of its minorities to practice their religion freely. But over the last few months, there's been a disturbing trend of attacks against those religious minorities.
Anda ingin melacurkan agama Anda. Anda ingin melacurkan agama Anda. Tolong polisi ini jangankan ini mulai fitnah.
If this continues, it's going to escalate, and at the end of it, it's going to be a full-blown religious war.
Indonesia's young democracy is struggling to manage these challenges of faith.
Jakarta, the Indonesian capital. It's a symbol of the success this country's seen over the last few years. Not too long ago, Indonesia was considered the weak man in Asia. Today, it shrugged off that past and is striding confidently into the future. But just an hour outside of the capital, a brewing religious conflict could be putting that future at risk.
Bekasi was once a sleepy village, now transforming into a growing suburb of Jakarta. Like much of Indonesia, it's an area dominated by Muslims. Rizomas is a minority here. She's a Protestant Christian, but she's never felt out of place. Her local Muslim butcher knows exactly how she likes her meat cut. It's a conversation they've been having for years. This is a scene that's reflective of Indonesia's tolerant society. But now religious tensions are threatening to rip this harmonious community apart.
Setelah kita beli rumah itu kan rumahnya orang Islam tadinya.
After we bought the house next door to use as a church, it became a problem for some people here. It used to be a Muslim's house. Other Muslims in the neighborhood started asking, why was it sold to the Christians?
The Protestant church became a sore point for the Muslims in Bekasi late last year. They became increasingly agitated by the regular Sunday prayers held here. Demonstrations outside the church called for its closure. Muslim residents said the Sunday prayers held here were illegal.
The Christians have violated Indonesian law, which requires them to get the written permission of residents in Bekasi before they can build a church here. They need the signature of at least 60 non-church members to do this, but many of the signatures the Christians have got are fake.
But the Christians say the signatures they've collected are genuine. Despite their insistence, the church was shut down by the government, but the Christians refused to give in. Frustration turned to fury. Some attacked the shop of a Muslim neighbor they felt had complained against them. The peace and quiet of Bekasi now shattered by the division amongst its residents.
Setelah penyegelan pertama, kita buka itu segel.
After the government sealed the church, we broke the locks. They gave us 3 warnings and then sealed it for a second time. But we continued to hold our services there.
They're not obedient citizens. You know, they have broken the law. We are not talking about religion. We are not against the people, the non-Muslims who perform prayers.
Across town, Khairul Fuad, a university lecturer, is getting ready for work. A family man, he prides himself on being a good Muslim. Khairul has never taken part in any of the church protests, but he's fed up with the Christians' refusal to abide by the law.
The issue is law, but the issue now is out of context. the non-Muslims trying to portray the Muslims are radicals, chasing the non-Muslims who are trying to perform prayer, who try to practice their own religion. That is out of context for me. They live in Indonesia. They don't live in California or London or somewhere in Singapore or whatever. But they live in the Muslim society where the Muslims are majority. And everything is regulated through the, by the law.
But for the Christians, this isn't a legal battle or about being in the minority. For Rizomas and her church, it's about the right to practice their religion freely in their own country. Their prayers were answered. After weeks of tension between the two sides, the government intervened.
Disitulah keluar surat dari sekretaris daerah.
The government gave us a letter allowing us to pray in an empty plot of land that we own. The letter clearly states the police will protect us during our church services. So we move our Sunday Mass there.
But even this solution proved to be short-lived and only served to widen the rift between the two communities in Bekasi.
This land is at the heart of the conflict between the two communities in Bekasi. The Christians say it belongs to them and they have the right to pray here. The Muslims say the Christians need a permit before they can make this land a place of worship. They've even put up signs warning Christians about what will happen if they continue with their prayers on Sunday. This one, for example, says, "Stop these illegal prayers right now, church people, or the public will take action."
And they did. On this Sunday, the Christians held their Mass surrounded by hundreds of angry Muslim residents. Neighbors turned to foes. The police powerless in the face of this chaos.
Anda sangat mengganggu. Ya. Sekarang Pak Pendeta, Anda harus paham situasi tidak bagus di sini.
In the middle of the crowd, arguing with the priest, is Murhali Barda.
Anda memprovokasi. Anda memprovokasi. Semua ingin kedamaian. Tidak ada yang ingin seperti ini. Anda orang Batak melakukan perbuatan yang tidak baik.
Murhali is the local leader of the Islamic Defenders Front, a group the Christians say is behind the clashes.
Anda ingin melacurkan agama.
The Islamic Defenders Front, a hardline Muslim group, has been accused of stirring up religious tension in Bekasi and around Indonesia. I went to meet Murhali Barda at the mosque where he worships to find out whether he's actively trying to cause a rift between the two communities in Bekasi.
I am part of the crowd, but I don't organize the public demonstrations against the Christians. Our Muslim community is being infiltrated by outsiders, and they do as they please. We cannot accept that. Only Allah knows what could happen next. But clearly, if we start chanting jihad, calling for holy war, it doesn't matter whether we live or die. If there's going to be chaos, the Christians have only themselves to blame.
It's not just in Bekasi that Indonesia is seeing cases of religious tension. Bonar Naipospos, a human rights activist, and his team have been documenting attacks against churches and religious minorities in the country for the last few years.
8 incidents in January, 5 incidents in
He showed me the latest evidence he's gathered on religious intolerance.
We record 28 incidents. This is double we compare with the previous years.
So do you think the government and President Yudhoyono, do you think they're worried about looking anti-Islamic?
In Indonesia, it's difficult to separate between religions and politics. All politicians think Islam is a political sources. If they want to be part of the government or they want to win in the election, local or in the central election, they must gain sympathy from the Muslims.